been receiving requests to do a follow-up to the 5 Misconceptions series that I did with some toilets and urinals. Well, today we're mostly going to be focusing on mostly toilets. This one's going to have more of a theme. If it has a different tank, it's a completely different model. And trust me, this is a lot more common than you think. For example, the Universal Roundel Atlas versus the Athens, the Eldra Patriot versus the Boy. Those ones are kind of more well known. In fact, I discussed one of them in my previous video. But these other 5 that I'm going to go over today are going to be just that. Tank swaps, pretty much. So, let's get started. The first one I'm going to go over is one that has been more of a recent discovery, for me at least. The 3rd generation Gerber Aqua Saver versus the actual 1st generation Gerber Maxwell. That's right, there's not 1, not 2, but 3 generations of the Gerber Aqua Saver. And trust me, it is a confusing mess. Me and others have thought this was the actual 1st generation Gerber Maxwell, but it's not. Technically speaking, it's an Aqua Saver. However, the ones with this tank right here is actually a Maxwell. Now, this has been a confusing mess for several reasons. One is that the fact that the balls are the exact same exact model codes and everything. Second off, the 3rd generation Gerber Maxwell was released around the time the 2nd generation Gerber Aqua Saver was still being made. The 2nd gen was made up until 2003, meanwhile the 3rd generation was introduced as early as 2002, which definitely didn't help things out. The Maxwell came a few years later, around the mid-2000s, at least circa 2004 at most. So now we know there's a 3rd generation of Gerber Aqua Saver, and it lasted up until 2010. Basically kind of an introduction to what the Maxwell will eventually be, but with a different tank. While we're on the topic of Gerber Maxwells, we're going to be talking about the differences between the original Gerber Maxwell, the Gerber Maxwell SE, and the lesser known and short-lived LX. So generally speaking, there are currently 4 generations of the Gerber Maxwell. But what if I told you there was a spin-off of the Gerber Maxwell, known as the Gerber Maxwell SE, that was introduced all the way back in 2009. This model is basically what the 3rd generation would somewhat be, minus the inconsistent designs and all that stuff. The way to tell the difference between the Gerber Maxwell SE and the original Gerber Maxwell is that the SE has accents on the base, as you can see here. Fun fact, the Gerber Maxwell SE is still offered to this very day, and it's somewhat mostly original design, although it's probably been redesigned a few times every now and then with some minor differences here or there. And then there's the lesser known LX model, which is basically the Gerber Maxwell SE bowl on whatever this tank is. It looks pretty cursed, and it seemed to only last a few years. It was also introduced in 2009, by the way, but it was very unpopular, as you can kind of tell, considering that this is currently the only one on YouTube. So, there's that, I guess. But yes, there is a spin-off of the original Gerber Maxwell, known as the Gerber Maxwell SC, and the LX. This next one I actually teased in my last video, but we're going to talk about the many different spin-offs of the 1.6 Cadet, or the 7th Gen Cadet, if you want to say. So most people know the classic 1.6 Cadet. In fact, it was very common for me, and still kind of is. But there's also some spin-offs that use the exact same ball as the original 1.6 Cadet. One of these is the Cadet Specifier, which is basically a Cadet ball on a colony-style tank. No, literally, that is it. There's also the Ravina, which is basically the Cadet ball on a fancier tank. Once again, that is pretty much it. I've seen several Cadet specifiers every now and then, but I have yet to see a Ravina. But other than that, they're pretty much the 1.6 Cadet, but with a different tank. Now there's obviously more Cadet spin-offs, like Town Square is basically a fancy 1.6 Cadet, but I'm not really counting that, because it's virtually a different model and a different design. But it is weird to see how many spin-offs of the 1.6 Cadet actually exist. It's pretty strange. Next, we're going to be comparing the American Standard Champion versus the American Standard Champion 4. Now, the Champion is actually the original model, introduced all the way back in 2003 and was made up until around circa 2007 or 8, when it got replaced in 2007 with the Champion 4. And here's how to tell them apart. The original Champion has more of an interesting design on the tank. It also has the pressure-assisted cadet-styled handle as well, and technically speaking has a completely different Champion flush valve, but most of those have been replaced with Champion 4 flush valves. Meanwhile, the Champion 4 has a completely different handle and a completely different style tank that's a lot more flatter and basic. It also has the Champion 4 flush valve, which is a large flapper. But that's just the first generation. There's also the second generations. Obviously, you have the current second generation Champion 4, which is just very plain. And then you got the Champion that was brought back from the dead into a second generation around 2020. No one asked for this, by the way, but here's how it looks. So, 2 different models, 2 different generations, and completely different looks. The last one we want to talk about here is the Toto Reliance versus the Toto Carusoe toilet. Both of these are front flusher models. However, while the bowls are pretty much the same, the tanks are completely different. The Toto Reliance, the Toto 1.6 gallon toilet from the Reliance commercial line, is the original model that was offered in the 1990s and came with a rectangular tank. Meanwhile, the Toto Carusoe seems to be more of a 2000s product that came with the Toto Drake tank instead. And that's literally it. The bowls are the exact same, but the tanks are slightly different. The Reliance having the rectangular tank, while the Caruso has the Toto Drake tank. I'm not so sure why a separate model was made, considering that it really isn't much different. And that is 5 more misconceptions about certain toilet models. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and let me know if you want to see more of this. And if you have any more topic suggestions, leave them down in the comments and let me know.